I believe Dean is participating and Lynn as well. So they're going to talk about WSPRnet. I still have yet to actually work WSPRnet, but I am rather interested in trying myself. I've done the, obligatory reading up about it, but I'm looking forward to learning a little bit about it tonight myself so I can start working it as well. So I think you're in for a treat. They've got some good experience doing this, so I'll hand it over to them. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for letting me share my interest and excitement with WSPRnet with you. If you thought FT8 was boring, you haven't seen a thing yet. Now, here's the measure for success. After we're done, I expect WSPRnet to spread faster than COVID-19. Was this too soon for humor? No, we have to laugh. All right, so we're going to do three things. One, Don's going to talk about his use case. Then we will be joined by the very talented Lynn, W4DDT. Did I get that right? Right. And she will talk about what WSPRnet has done, how she has exploited it as a new ham to the hobby. So that's very interesting. And then we're going to hit it home with Dean, KK4DS, who's going to actually show us how you install it and get it working. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to go pretty quickly. So you can hold the questions, but not the applause. Thank you. All right, so could I impose on somebody to drive for me? An inexpensive rental, an Uber. Who has cars? So this is the first screen when you see WSPR. How many of you have used any digital mode? How many of you have not used a digital mode? All right, fine. You're my audience. This is what WSJTX looks like. It is your gateway to all of the digital modes that are so popular now, except for GSA call. And you see down here on the drop-down list is WSPR. It's just a mode. Dean's going to talk us through how you get this thing configured, but get WSJTX installed, hit the drop-down for mode, find WSPR, and Dean's going to walk us through the rest. Good. What does the signal look like on a waterfall? Well, not much. This is what it looks like. You'll see there's a 200 hertz bandwidth. That little line in the middle is just somebody's strong signal. That tiny little red caret that's up there, that's where my signal will be within that 200 hertz bandwidth. And on the left, what does it look like if you zoom in with an online SDR? That's what I did here. That's it. It looks like a dead worm coming out after the rain after a car ran over it. But that's what the waterfall looks like. One more. We're not going to cover this. Dean's going to talk about this. Very exciting. You can do band hopping. Very exciting. Next. Okay. What's the power level associated with WSPR? So the key is go low and glow. So this is a distribution of power levels on the left and the number of signals and distance achieved with those power levels. And the distance is not the thing. It's the power levels on the left that are the thing. And you see, a lot of people are at 5 watts. A lot of people are at less than half a watt. And there's a good bit at 0.1 watts. So this is if you're into those little teeny transmitters that fit in an Altoid tin, this is your jam. There's some Yahoo that looks like this is a logarithmic scale, but you see like one of those guys up there at 20 and somebody else up there at 50 and somebody else at 30. They're probably an idiot that's broadcasting too much. And I looked at that call sign as really an offensive KM4 UDX, so somebody's got to talk to that idiot. Next. Okay, so what can you do with this? As a relatively new ham, and I don't know how long I can keep on saying that, I'm always interested in when do the heavens open up? When does the atmospheric God smile on us and allow us to communicate? WSPRnet is a great way to figure that out from your location with your antenna, with your radio, and the heavens over your house. So no theory. This is what's going to work from your QTH. And I plotted this by time, by band, and I simply summed up the number of miles that band had achieved over 24 hours. And you can see 14 meters opens up about when? Yeah, all right. So really, really interesting. So don't bother at 20 hours. Okay, so that's what's very cool use for WSPRnet is when do the bands open up for you at over your house. Next. There's times when things don't work as well. Have you ever had a conversation and then the band just faded, right? Well, that's what you're seeing here. This is W4DDT. We're looking at her data. She's very gracious, and everyone who runs WSPR, if you allow your data to go up to the big cloud in the sky, your data is available for everybody to benefit from. It's sort of one of the original sharing modes, data sharing modes. So this is her reception data for 80 meters over 24 hours. And you can see there's a little gap here from 13, and you don't go long again. So that's like 6,000 kilometers. You don't go long again until 22. Well, you guys all know that, but for somebody that's new, for me, it's like I look at that and go, oh, that's why they say there are times when bands work well and when they don't. So we're just seeing here what all you experienced folks know about, but for people like me is kind of thrilling. That's why you guys say that. I thought you were lying. Turns out you were right. Okay, next. Here's another one. So over 2 weeks of 40-meter transmitting, who heard this signal? And you're looking at your ability to get out of town, and it's difficult to see, but there's a very thin gray, thin light blue line here. That is the statistical average. And that got added because of a certain VWS member working with the developer. Won't mention who, but its call sign ends with UDX. And I wanted to see what was the average, and he agreed. So that's why that trend line is there. And so from 0 hours to 2,400 hours, here's when things were popping. And it's just so interesting that you get this wall, and we'll see this again. This wall comes out at 1,900 hours. So distance, logarithmic distance on the top, time on the bottom. This is what happened on 40 meters for me. Next.
And you are getting a report back on how far away the station is then?
Exactly. Yep.
And sorry, what's your power out at this point?
I'm a little schizophrenic, but I typically try to camp around 10 to 15. So when I first started this hobby, I was so unsure of what I was doing that I cranked up the power all the way. You know, I think I committed atmospheric flatulence. Yeah, no. And so part of the way I sort of got that adolescent instinct under control was by realizing, oh, I could turn it down and be just as successful. Yeah.
So what's happening is you're transmitting, and they're hearing. And when they hear, they're reporting back to WSPRnet on the internet. Right, so there's no two-way between your stations. It's you to them, and then you report to the internet. And then when you hear, you report your calls up to the internet. And then these reports come from going on the internet and then doing a download of everybody's traffic.
I will never, as long as I'm alive, disagree with anything Dean has said. But this all came off a website. There was no downloading. All right. Are all of your antennas directional? They have a directional component to them. Anybody run with a dipole, you get lobes, right? Only a real vertical is omni. So what this shows you on the left is what is the azimuth when I transmit? Who's receiving me when I transmit? That's what you see on the left. And my antenna has a strong predilection for 60 degrees. Yeah, I cut off the top and bottom of it, but that's 60 degrees. So what direction is that? Roughly 60 degrees. When? What? No. Right. When I receive, which is the right-hand side, it's the opposite. Oh, Don, of course. Well, it's still fascinating to me. And because you have all these colored dots, each one of these different dots represents a different band. So I let it rip for all bands. Your antenna may be directionally different per band, and then you could just tease that out by going up on the top, hit the drop-down menu, and pick the band you want and see how your antenna propagates. Now, full disclosure, only people who hear you, who are available to hear you, can hear you. So if you had some weird directional pattern to your antenna, but there's nobody over there listening, you're not going to figure that out. So you're limited to the population of receivers. Now you're thinking, yeah, dude, Don, that's a big problem. How many people do you think there are stations now hooked up to WSPRnet reporting their spots? Somebody just give me a number. Too many? Give me another number. Over 2,000. So that's a big distribution of people that are available to listen to you. Next. So that's the directional stuff. Okay, here. On the top is one of the better, not only one of the better websites for looking at your data. So this is people who hear you and people who you hear and then other people that you have nothing to do with, which is important because sometimes you want to benchmark yourself against somebody else. So you can compare how well do they hear versus how well I hear. What are we looking at here? On the left is the distance. On the bottom is the time. And this was 10 meters. And I couldn't figure out why in the VWS club there's a 10-meter net. I thought, why do they do 10 meters? It's at nighttime. They ought to be doing 80 or 40 or go long. But instead, the poobahs, the grand wizards, seem to know instinctively that 10 meters is the band. Well, now I see why. It never drops out. It never disappears. For less than 60 miles, 10 meters is the bomb. You can take this bad boy to the bank. So 10 meters for a local net is exactly the right choice. So that was kind of exciting. You never have to worry about an atmospheric dropout. Only once, however, was I heard by a faraway guy, K9AN, who was going to show up later. So, but keep that guy in mind. Next. Okay, so Howard left his WSPRnet on for a while, and this is his data. And what's on the left is distance, and what on the right is time. And it's for forgotten what band it was. 40. Oh, thank you. Ah, it says so. And I wanted to look at some of the individual people who were hearing him. And so there's Don, there's Lynn, there's Dean, there's a fellow that'll only be known as Dr. Evil, and then he was picked up in South Africa. So that's a pretty good day for Howard, K0LKD. Yeah, he's good. Next. Let's see, so I was looking at Howard's, people who heard Howard, people who gave Howard a spot report by frequency. Oh, he's really good at 7 megahertz, not so much at 3.5, and he's squirting out a little bit at 1.8. So I thought, you're great on 40 meters, not so good on 80 meters. So is that because people aren't there to listen? Probably not. There's probably something about how we transmit that his location doesn't get out as far on 80 as it does on 40. Or maybe, but this was over 24 hours, so you can't say, Don, you didn't look at nighttime. I got 24 hours here. So it's interesting. Next. In general, you don't do WSPRnet to make two-way communications because there aren't any. However, there is a website that says, okay, I'm taking all your spot reports, and I'm going to combine them with everybody else's. And where you heard someone, and that someone heard you within the same 24-hour period on the same band, we're going to call that a two-way contact, sort of a virtual QSO. It only happens up in the cloud. It's a match made in heaven. You don't know whether it happened or not, but the electrons up in the sky do. And then what if you put those in descending order to say, who had the most of these two-way contacts? That might be a pretty cool thing, and then you could rank them. So I thought this was intriguing, and I started to look at how well I was doing at two-way contacts, virtual two-way contacts, and comparing myself to other people. And I cherry-picked the data. I'm not anywhere near this good normally, because I wanted to pretend I was really good for you people. Here I'm in 4th place, and that's simply based on the number of a descending rank of the two-way reports. So 171 grid squares, 452 two-way reports, and it starts each month, rolls to the end of the month, and starts over again. So it's a great way to compare yourself to others. Next. Now, I wasn't always this good. Here I started off in 70th place. I was humiliated, ashamed of myself, wouldn't show up in public. And each month I improved my operations. I reduced my noise floor, I got a little better antenna operations, I fixed some of my cabling, I learned a little bit more about the software, and I slowly climbed the leaderboard. And 5th is about my natural place in the order of the universe. Because when I look at 4, 3, 2, and 1, they are killers. I am just a rank amateur with a little flea bag set of equipment compared to, real professionals. And this right here is the rig that's doing all this mystery. This is my Franken Ubix with an integrated CPU. So everybody knows I love my radio. How many of your highfalutin Flex 6000s and ICOM 7300s and KX 257 millions will charge your cell phone? Mine does. And how many of your highfalutin extraordinary radios will run a PowerPoint slide? Right here, it's all integrated. Okay, so that's the rig that is competitive. Next. So in my struggle to get better, it turns out that I fell on something that all of you already know, and all of you already told me, but I failed to pay attention. If you can't hear them, if you can't hear them, exactly. So Don learned that the hard way. So what I wanted to do was to say, okay, if the people that are always better than I am, what are they doing so much better than I am? Turns out they're hearing better. So one way to figure that out is just to do a ratio of how much do you hear to how much do people hear you. And I just ranked these stellars, these gods amongst men. And it turns out that the guy that was the best when I was looking at this data actually hears more than he transmits. He listens more than he talks. This little idiot over here, KM4UDX, is off the map. He's shouting, but he has terrible ears. He doesn't listen well. So that was my problem. Too much yakking and not enough listening. So if I was going to get better, I had to improve my ability to hear. So that was kind of interesting. Humiliating, embarrassing, but it gave me something to work on. Next. Here's a guy that's always at the top of the list. I'm looking at his stuff. I'm thinking, God, this guy is so good. If I could only be half as good as he is, I'd be so happy. And so I was looking at his data, and then I compared the same time period, the same everything to mine. And I want you guys to visually, no data analysis required, just visually, tell me why Don sucks. Why is he so bad compared to this guy who's so good? So this is our goal, this is our baseline, and the next chart, go back. Yes, that's it. Come forward. And one more time. Yeah, what's different? Yeah, Don can't hear Europe. Until I can figure that out, crack that nut, I'm stuck where I am, in the back of the pack. So I'm going to work on that as I have time. Okay, so part of getting better is looking at where you have issues and remediating those issues. So I was looking at people that I could hear and people could hear me, and I noticed that sometimes I was sending out more than one transmission. I'd send out one, but they would receive two. Why is that? What am I doing? And so this is supposed to be all the same frequency, but you see there's a pair here. Can you tell the difference between, it's so hard to see, between 62 and 182? What is that difference? Just subtract. This is not a trick question. 182 minus 62? Aha. And it turns out that all of these are different by 120. Somebody's radio is sending out, has 120 ripple in it. So it's 60 hertz, converted, gives you 120. And that's mixing in with my little radio and sending out these little spurious things. So I have to clean up my act. I've got a little 120 hertz in here. Now, only people close can hear it. Look at the difference in the noise levels. How far down is my spurious signal? Well, you might do 28 minus 5, or 28 plus 5, 32, right? is that FCC standard 32 hertz, 32 dB down for spurious signal? Does anybody know what that thing is? Well, it's really borderline. It's like 35. So my rig technically is not compliant. It's really close, but I'm not quite there yet, as field measurements would indicate. Next. So here's another case. Dean kindly received me, and I was looking at his stuff, and sure enough, he got that other signal I was sending out, 120 hertz off. So that's my digital flatulence I need to work on. What's great about this website is you click a button that says select duplicates, and then you click on the duplicate, and it tells you what the difference was. Next. More stuff of duplicates, very easy to see. So all these were duplicates that I sent out that somebody kindly received. I should go apologize to people for this. Next. So I wanted to play a little game. If I turn up the power, do I get more spurious emissions compared to turning it down? Right? Rigs go into non-linear performance when you step on the gas, and if you turn off the gas, they get better. So that's what I did. And the way I figured that out is Whisper lets you send and Dean's going to cover this, you send your call sign, your power level, and one other thing that I'm forgetting. But you can change that. So if you make some change in your setup, like you're using a different antenna, you can just change the power level without actually changing the power level, right? That's just a signature. It's like adding a slash after your call sign. This is KD2OM. It's an intensive. He's got a bunch of online SDRs. He's got multiple channels. He's got custom software, big computers. He has a 280-foot terminated beverage antenna. He's got sky loops. I'm never touching that. This is what I'm competing with, Goliath and David. Yeah. Okay. Next. This is Howard's data when he was letting his Whisper run free. This website will give you the top 10 in a little window, so you don't have to go fish for it. It's just right there, and it breaks it out by band. So good job, Howard. Next. Yeah, Howard. Next. Does anybody know what kind of antenna this is? It's like an Archimedean spiral antenna. We have a club member, John, KC3NTS, who was building this, who saw that Lynn and I were doing Whisper, emailed us and say, would you guys mind camping out on 40 meters, 80 meters? Camp out on 80 meters or 40 meters, because I'm building this thing, and I need you guys to stand still while I do some improvements and tuning here. And as long as you stay still and do just one thing, I can measure improvements on my antenna. And we were thrilled to do that. So that's another example of using Whisper to do fun stuff. Next. I think that's it. Are we done? Good, we're done. Okay, next up is, thank you so much. Next up is Lynn, who's going to take a different perspective, and she's going to share with you what would a new ham do with Whisper. Thank you.
Thank you. No slides. It's just me. Where should I be? Okay. So I'm Lynn, W4DDT. I'm new to ham radio. I got my license a year ago. I knew nothing about ham radio before that. I came to ham radio because I wanted to learn Morse code. And then I met Pete. And Pete's like a drug dealer. He just like hooks you, And there I am, Oh my God. So it turns out Morse code's pretty hard to learn. I kind of learned it. I can kind of listen to it, but I can't really operate using that. So Pete gets me a radio, a loaner radio, and we throw an antenna up there, and suddenly I'm sitting there at my little radio, and, he's like, yeah, push to talk, push the button, talk. I'm like, oh, I forgot to say, I've been phone phobic my whole life. I don't even talk on the phone. Certainly not going to talk on the air. So suddenly, I got to figure out what in the heck I'm going to do. So I hung around with all of you guys, and I listened at lunch, and I listened to everybody doing their thing. And eventually, You know, I was on the radio a little, but not much. Eventually, I hear about these digital modes, and I start kind of figuring that out. And I went to Doug's house for the RIDI contest last year, and I said, okay, I think I could maybe do that. That's good. I don't have to talk. And then I don't know where I even heard about WSPRnet. There must have been some presentation. So I think, that's it. All I had to do was download the software. I had bought this cute little KX2. We figured out the sound card. And it was like a miracle. I could tell if I was transmitting, which was great because I had once tried to do Parks on the Air. I called CQ for hours and no one ever heard me, but I don't know if I was really getting out there. So with WSPRnet, you can tell within 10 minutes. You know, you let it run a little and eventually, someone hears you and you can look at those spots. So you can find out whether, you can certainly see that you're receiving. You can see if you're getting out there. And that's great because I don't have to call Pete, I don't have to call Don, I don't have to call anyone. I can figure this out myself. So this is cool. I like this. Let's see. So I know if my rig is working, and from all that stuff that Don just showed you that I can hardly analyze at all, you can tell whether, what bands you're working the best on and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of cool. So it's great. If you're a data cruncher, it's really fun too. This is a great mode for introverts like me. I don't mind talking here like this, but I don't want to talk on the air. And I'm not going to turn myself into that kind of a person. So WSPRnet lets me participate without having to become an extrovert. I've tested my antennas. My antenna is set up so that I can bring it down and put something else up there and then run WSPRnet for a while, see if it's working. So that's nice. It allows me to do it myself. One time I changed my antennas and I let it run for 24 hours and I was like, God, I'm not getting out anywhere. I was like, maybe hitting Tennessee and New York, and I thought, God, something's really wrong. Turned out I had forgotten to hook up the antenna at all. So that was what I received. Yeah, it was great. My feed line still pulled stuff in. So this is a good mode. This is good. Let's see. I bought a little KX2, which for me was a nice little investment. So I am working that thing 24/7. It's earning its keep, so that's cool. If you borrow a rig or an antenna, you can pretty much test things pretty quickly. I don't have any test equipment, so WSPRnet lets me do that testing my own self. Let's see. Okay, there's lots of support out there. There's smart people like Dean and Don and Howard and Al, so I don't have to be smart. I just, gather the smart people around me. So that works real well. And they're really happy to help. So if you're new, call them. I'll give you their numbers, okay? For me, radio is still like this magic thing. And WSPRnet is really magical. I set my radio at night, I turn it on, I let it go. I get up in the morning and it's been around the world. I just love that. I don't know. For me, it is magic. I have reached Western Australia, Tasmania, New Zealand, Antarctica, Madagascar, South Africa. So, if that's not magic, I don't know what is. The downside is there's long transmit and receive periods. So like you turn it on, you're waiting. You gotta wait 2 minutes, you gotta wait 2 minutes. It kind of makes FT8 look like the Fast and the Furious, so I guess maybe that's good for FT8. For me, personally, one of the downsides is since I'm not using single sideband, I don't get that same special treatment and consideration that YLs get in this OM world. That's kind of sad, but it's an okay trade-off. And well, I guess for purists, some people feel that it's not real radio, but I would say that it's WSPRnet is sort of it sort of let me get in the door of radio. Like at first I wouldn't do anything. Now I'm doing a little FT8. I might do this JS call, JS8. Yeah. So it's a little bit of a gateway drug. Yeah, exactly. So that's what's in it for newbies. And now Dean's going to talk about the smart guy stuff.
All right, so thank you guys. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to make this thing work and what it takes to get going. So we just lost the screen. It's back. Okay. Weak signal propagation reporter. So that's what WSPR stands for. That's your first lesson. It's part of the WSJTX suite by Joe Taylor, same as FT8 rather. You can find you can tell what a dumb guy he is. You can find his stuff at physics.princeton.edu. So he's a physicist and a ham radio operator, and he, over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, has developed a large number of these weak signal modes, including FT8 and the precursor to the JS8 that you heard about earlier. And the way all of these things work is they are dependent on a lot of math in a computer to extract very low signal from noisy channels. So it's a low signal mode. You can see up here. Let's see those the dB column, minus 26 dB, minus 31 dB. That's minus 31 dB signal to noise ratio. So that means 32 dB more noise than signal. That means when you turn it on your radio, all you hear is shh. You don't even hear a signal, and the software picks the signal out of that noise through signal processing. And the reason it takes 2 minutes is because it sends it over and over and over and over again with error correction during that time, so that it can make sure that that signal goes through. So that's what it looks like. Next slide. Talk a little bit about how you set it up. Next slide. So first thing you got to do is download the WSJT software suite. It's the same software that runs FT8. So if you've already got that, you already have this. Simplest thing: set up your call sign, your grid square. Those are the two things you got to put in that in terms of identifying you. Next slide. Got to set up your radio. So these little microbitixes emulate a Yaesu FT817 for cat control. Cat control is the way you control the radio from the computer. It sets the frequency, makes it transmit. You got to have something to make it transmit, because unless you want to be sitting there every 2 minutes and hitting your transmit button when it comes around to transmit, you really need the cat control. So you need to get the computer to radio interface going. Generally, it's straightforward. Name your radio, the baud rate. Generally, everything else will default, and it should just work if you have a cat control interface on your rig that you can hook up through the serial port. Sound card. You also have to be able to get sound in and out. The way all of these things work is sound comes out the speaker of your computer, and it has to get into your rig, and sound comes out of your rig, and it has to get into your computer. And in my case, that's done with 2 audio cables, one going to audio out and one going to microphone in, and it works just fine. Some folks have problems if their rigs are putting out, say, voltage on the microphone line that can sometimes cause problems for PCs. But in my case, mine does that. I don't have any problems. I don't have any issues. The only thing you have to be wary of is not overdriving either direction, right? So you want to keep the volumes going to your radio low enough so that you're not spattering, and you want to keep the volume coming in from your radio to your rig so that you're not overdriving the rig. And I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like in the software in a second. All right, so next thing is what are the other things you need to do to set it up? This is the basic screen. Again, you can drag these around and resize them. This is the way I have it set up on mine. I like to see kind of what's coming in, and I like to see a lot of what's going on the waterfall over time. But there's a couple of things I want to point out. One of them is in the bottom here are all the different controls for how you kind of make WSPRnet actually work. And the first thing you'll see over here on the left is there's the this little green dial. That's your incoming signal. That's the strength of your incoming signal. Generally, you want that to be about between 20 and 40 when there's nothing being transmitted. You want to actually be measuring the noise at around 20 to 40 dB, because it's a signal-to-noise ratio that it's looking for. It needs to know what the noise level is. So if you're dialed down too low, it's not going to work. And if you're dialed up too high, it's not going to work. So generally, you want to keep this at around 20 to 40, because that will allow it to best decode your signal. And you do that generally by adjusting the volume on your radio, because your radio is putting out volume on its phone out, and that's going directly into your microphone in onto your laptop or your computer. You might have an ability on your computer to control the microphone volume as well. Either one will work, but you got to get this into the 20 to 40 range. If you're too high, this is going to turn red, and it's going to say you're overdriving. I can't listen. I can't do anything. So you got to keep that in mind. So that's number one. Over here, this guy says power, and the way you use that is when you're transmitting. If you have a watt meter and you can see what your transmitted power is, you can drag that down until you get your power range where you want it to be. And generally, it's a weak signal mode. Generally, you're recommending that you run less than 10 watts. So you'll see some guys are running more than 10 watts, but as you saw from Don's presentation, a lot of people are running milliwatts. So if you are capable of that much granularity, you can drag it down, and then you can see what the difference between in power is. So you've got your audio input over here, you got your power output over there. No backup one. Okay, so set of buttons across the top: stop, monitor, erase, decode, enable transmit, halt transmit, tune. A little checkbox for menus. So monitor is what it comes up in when you first start. You first start. Comes up in monitor. You can pull down the frequency that you want on monitor, 40 meters. It will set the frequency on your rig properly once you have cat control set up. You don't need to worry about that. It'll just set it up, and you just let it go. And you can just watch, and it will start receiving. The one thing you have to be aware of is this is all upper sideband. So even if you're on 40 and 80, that would normally be lower sideband for single sideband transmission. All these digital modes work in upper sideband. So got to make sure your radio actually switches to upper sideband. Mine actually didn't switch automatically, so sometimes I have to double check. Once I set it once, it's usually okay though. So then you just listen, and then it will start telling you what it's hearing. And I'll talk to you about exactly what we're seeing up here in a minute. Next thing I want to talk about is automatic mode. And back up one more for just a second. This little red arrow says schedule. So now go to the next one. So this allows you to tell the WSPRnet software what frequencies you want to use and what times a day you would like to use them. So the things in yellow, 160 to 10 meter. The different categories are sunrise, gray line time, daytime, sunset, gray line time, nighttime, tune only, receive only. So you see the way I've got it set up. I'm on 80, 40, 20, 17, 12, and 10 all day. Anytime I run those. Why am I on those frequencies? Because that's what my antenna is resonant at without me having to touch an antenna tuner. So I can run on those bands. You know, Don asked me, well, why are you on 80 in the middle of the day? There's nothing going on there. Well, I said, well, I turn it on so I don't have to think about it, and it'll rotate through, and it listens on it. You can put it on that schedule mode, and it'll just swap. It'll change frequencies every 2 minutes, and it'll listen on a different band. And you know, you'll know if the band is open or not very, very, very quickly. So that's what the schedule button does. It just tells you what frequencies you want to be on, what bands you want to be on, what time of the day. Next. So we'll talk about operation a little bit. So we talked a little bit about how to control it and set it up. First thing to know is there's a little checkbox here called upload spots. If you want all the nifty stuff that Don showed, you got to upload spots, because otherwise all you get is this. Okay? All that other stuff, all those graphs, all that kind of stuff, all the maps, that all comes from the internet. So you got to upload your spots. So, and if you upload your spots, you just tick it off, which means you have to be connected to the internet to do it. Right? So if you're not connected to the internet, you're not going to get your spots uploaded. That won't work. If you want to transmit as well as receive, you got to hit the red button. It's not red until you hit it. When you hit it, you're going to be in transmit, and then you get to determine how often you want to transmit compared to receive. So right here it says transmit percent 20%. That means 20% of the time you're transmitting. So over 10 minutes, 2 minutes is going to be transmit, the other 8 minutes is going to be receive. And it randomizes from that band plan I showed you, it randomizes when it's going to, what it's going to be transmitting, what it's going to be receiving on, so that it's not on any kind of regular cycle, so you don't miss somebody because they're on some other cycle, right? Because you can imagine if everybody had it clicked the same way and they were all in this rigid cycle, you might just start missing people because you're all jumping around the same time. So that is how you deal with that. This here, transmit, 1500 hertz. You can transmit between 1400 and 1600 hertz up from your VFO frequency. So that's all of these Joe Taylor modes work in a very narrow bandwidth with inside what would normally be a single SSB bandwidth. So within that, you've got a couple hundred hertz where all of these signals go. It's one of the reasons why nobody really complains that people plug this in and turn it on and it runs all day. They're all running in one little tiny little piece of the band, and they're all running really, really low power. And the only people they're QSBing with are themselves, right? So it's one little band, one little piece of the band, and that's where all of these thousands of stations are transmitting and receiving all day long.
Operation okay then? Is that
So I am not telling you that unintended operation is okay. What I am telling you is that's where everybody runs, okay? So unattended operations is okay. The rules are the rules. That's where everybody runs. And, you know, you're not hearing a lot of complaints about it. And it is a really, really useful tool. As Don showed you, it goes beyond just, you know, am I transmitting, am I receiving? It's like, you know, it really helps you understand what's happening with your rig, what's happening with propagation. It's really, really useful. And the fact that everybody's participating makes it even better, because you can now begin to look at this, this stuff worldwide. So once you do that, and you've hit enable transmit, then you just sit back and let it go, and it'll receive, it'll transmit. Over time, you'll see the signal reports come in. You see on the waterfall. You see that at the top it's at 80 meter. You can see I'm not getting much on 17 meter, but then the next time I was getting some on 17 meter, then 20 meter, 40 meter, and then that particular instance, 80 meter, I wasn't hearing anything. So I'm not exactly sure what that means, other than you're able to see what's actually happening on the band. And you know, you can also see somebody there is transmitting pretty loud. They got a strong signal there, and they're splattering all over. So they're probably not at 10 watts, they're probably at 100 watts. And so they're probably drowning out a bunch of signals because they're doing that, right? So because they don't know what they're doing, so they got it set up wrong. Next. All right, so this is just showing you that all of the frequencies are all plugged in. You don't need to worry about it, and that's one of the ways this thing stays in its box, is that everybody's on the same frequencies. Next. Okay, so what happens? Here's what you get back. This is a close-up of what we were looking at before. So for each report, you're getting back the UTC, the time, and this is very important. Just like all of these other Joe Taylor modes, you must have your time properly synchronized. I didn't cover how to do that now, but simplest way is with NTP software. If you've got Windows, you can download it. It runs as like a driver in the background, and it just keeps you synchronized. If you don't run some kind of time synchronization software, all of your PCs will drift. And over days, they will drift far enough out that this will stop working. Because everybody's transmitting on the same and listening on the same 2-minute windows, everybody's got to be synchronized in order for these things to work. So that's first thing. dB, this shows you the dB signal to noise ratio. So you can see up at the top, minus 23 dB. So that's, you know, if you think of voice communication or even CW, you can't imagine hearing a signal at minus 23 dB or minus 30 dB, and with these weak signal modes, you actually can do that. DT is how far they are off the time synchronization. So if you see somebody up here, that's this guy here, 4 seconds, he's pretty close to dropping out of being able to participate anymore. So he should be looking at that and realizing, I'm not synchronizing my time. Frequency, obviously that's a frequency that you are listening on. Drift is another way, Don, you can see whether or not your the frequencies are staying consistent. That shows you how much the frequencies are drifting. So on the receiving side, they would be seeing drift. They'd be seeing your frequency moving up and down a little bit between transmissions. So you can see most of these are pretty stable. They're not moving. Obviously, the call sign, the grid square, the power in dBm. So for those of you that are not dBm inclined, 40 dBm would be 10 watts, and 20 dBm would be 0.1 watt, right? So you can kind of see the power levels are all in that. There's one running at 10 watts. Everybody else is running somewhere below that, so somewhere in between. So while I was doing all this today, I was just letting it run in the background. Let's look at the next one. And so this is what I got just in a couple hours while I was just hanging around today. So these guys are down in Australia. Let's see. Signal to noise ratio minus 25 dB. This is me transmitting, so that's my 10 watts, but he's receiving me at minus 25 dB down in Australia. And you can see in the same kind of time period, same couple hours, I was also hitting South Africa, South America, Iceland, and where's Don? We got to work on your antenna, man. The reason you're not getting Europe is your antenna. So we will get you getting, because I get Europe all day long and all night long. I can talk on my little QRP rig, almost QRP, around 10 watts. I can talk single sideband voice to Europe almost every single night. So we'll get you talking to Europe, and you'll be #1 on that leaderboard before you know it. So so anyway, that's kind of WSPRnet from kind of 3 angles, right? So Don's got the kind of analytic view and kind of everything you can learn from it. Lynn's like, yeah, let's get on the air, and I'm like, all right, I can make it work. Let's make it work, and we'll make it happen. And any one of us would be happy to help if you have any further questions or anything else you're interested in. So thank you very much. We got a minute or 2 left for questions if there are any.
Comment, using the primary sound card, the default sound card, you might want to go into your volume mixer and make sure system sounds are turned off and your web browser is turned off and everything else.
Yeah, so what he's saying is if you're going to use your primary sound card to drive it, you want to turn off Windows sounds, because when you go into transmit mode, let's say you get a piece of mail that comes in and it goes ding, you're going to be transmitting that over the air, and you probably don't want to be transmitting your Windows sounds out over the air, even at 1 watt.
What do you expect your WSPRnet data to look like for the 12 hours tomorrow, starting at 1 p.m. to 1 a.m.?
In terms of,
Is there a trick question?
you're thinking something.
The RIDI contest.
Oh, it'll make no difference. Other than you might have fewer participants because people are doing RIDI instead of Whisper.
You don't think RIDI's going to be stomping all over the WSPR frequencies?
They might be.
It'll be interesting.
They might be. They might be, but on the other hand, remember, this is a weak signal mode with lots and lots of retries over 2 minutes, and the signals will get decoded even with the RTTY signals on top, because you're already able to deal at 30 dB below. So from a whisper point of view, RTTY's just noise, right? It's just more noise. So I think it's probably going to be fine.
Another quick one then. Have you seen a lot of people using Whisper on VHF, like 2 meter?
I haven't looked.
Haven't looked. Last thing I wanted to add is the bulk of the interaction you've seen here is over a browser. So the way you interact with your radio is not through the front end of your radio, as gorgeous, or in my case, as unpleasant as that is. You use a browser. The browser is your portal into your radio. So I close this, I minimize the application, I fire up my browser, and I'm happy as a clam. This is basically just a USB appliance now. Put it back behind the monitor. I don't need to see it. I don't need to interact with it. And I want all of you to go home tonight, fire up your Whisper, and let it running, because then you will become one of the 2,286 reporters of WSPRnet. And each day there's between 1.8 million and 2 million spot reports. So how many do you get with reverse beacon CW? Too few to count. So compare that with 2 million a day. That's why WSPRnet is so persuasive and compelling as a radio hobby utility. Thank you, everybody. And big round of applause for Lynn and Dean. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dean, Don, and Lynn. That was excellent. Thank you all for coming out tonight. This is that's about it. So we got to be out of here in about 5 minutes. So thank you all for coming, and